Her name was there, after the florist, after the cake. Not Mom, just guest. I read the message 3 times before it really sank in. Mom, Steph thought maybe we should do something a bit quieter this year. Just the 3 of us. Cabin up north. Hope you understand. There was no malice in it. Just the kind of sterile kindness that leaves no room to reply. I looked over at the roast already marinating in the fridge. The handmade stockings hung above the fireplace. The tiny embroidered blanket I'd spent 3 weeks stitching for my grandson. Everything smelled like cinnamon and clove. Everything looked ready, except I wasn't invited. Not really. They didn't say it in words, but it was all there. Clear as the snowfall outside my window. I wasn't part of the picture this year. I closed the message, though the words stayed with me like static in the air. Lucas didn't even call. He just texted. I should have known. I suppose. There were signs, little things. Subtle. Stephanie not responding to my holiday plans. Lucas avoiding eye contact when I brought up traditions. But I kept brushing them off, thinking they're just busy. People are always busy, but no one's too busy to be kind. I stood still for a long time, in that warm kitchen that suddenly felt colder than the Vermont wind outside. The table had already been set with the good china. I'd ironed the cloth napkins. My late husband's chair was dusted, ready to hold our son's son. And now there would be no one. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't ask why. I just turned off the oven and stood beside a tree I'd decorated alone. For a family that wouldn't be coming, I wasn't told to stay away. I was just quietly expected not to show up. There was a time when Christmas meant peanut butter cookies rolled in sugar and the smell of pine that lingered on Lucas's mittens. A time when the tree was plastic and a little lopsided but stood proud in the corner like it knew it had a purpose. After Robert died, the house got quieter but Christmas got louder, because I made it that way. I was 39, a new widow, and suddenly the only person between my little boy and the kind of childhood people write sad stories about. Lucas was 7, too young to understand the permanence of loss, but old enough to notice that his father's jacket no longer hung by the door. I remember the first winter without Robert, how the snow piled against the front step like it was trying to bury us from the world. How Lucas asked if Santa still came to houses that only had one parent. I smiled and told him Santa had a soft spot for boys who were brave. That night, I stayed up till 2 sewing patches onto his too small coat and wrapping hand-me-down books in last year's leftover paper. We didn't have much, but what we had was wrapped in love and exhaustion. I taught at the local elementary school during the day and cleaned houses on weekends when Lucas went to piano lessons at the neighbors. I skipped lunch to save money, skipped sleep to grade papers, skipped crying so he wouldn't see. I told myself it was temporary, that if I just kept going, kept smiling, kept choosing the harder path, one day it would all be worth it. And for a while, it was. Lucas never knew how many bills I paid late, or how many dinners were built around whatever was on sale. He just knew that his birthday cakes were homemade, and his Halloween costumes always looked like they belonged in a magazine. When he got into the science fair finals in 5th grade, I drove 4 hours in a car with no heat just to watch him present a baking soda volcano with the confidence of a future engineer. He won 2nd place. I cried in the bathroom stall where no one could see. High school came with honors classes and scholarship dreams. And I kept every program, every certificate, every scrap of paper with his name in bold. He wanted to go to MIT. I didn't even blink. I sold Robert's old watch, picked up summer tutoring, stopped buying new shoes, and we made it work. When the acceptance letter came, we danced in the kitchen with the fridge open and the radio playing static. "You did it, baby," I whispered. "You're going to fly." On move-in day, I ironed every shirt in his suitcase, folded his socks into neat little rows, and tucked a handwritten note behind his pillow. He called me 3 days later to say he'd found it and that he cried when he read it. I love you, Mom. I'm going to make you proud. And he did. At least, I thought he did. He got a job after college, married Stephanie, a woman with perfect posture and a voice like cooled honey, and they moved into a townhouse with more bathrooms than people. I sent them towels, a plant, a slow cooker. He said thank you. She never did. I told myself it didn't matter. Not everyone is warm right away. Not everyone knows what to do with a mother-in-law who still makes soup from scratch. And so I backed away slowly, gave them space, waited to be invited in instead of asking. Every Christmas after that, there was a reason he couldn't come: work deadlines, travel plans, her family's traditions. He always called, though, sent photos. One year it was a framed picture of them in matching sweaters holding their newborn like a trophy. I put it on the mantel next to Lucas's kindergarten handprint ornament. I told myself this was what success looked like: distance, growth, independence. But the silence started to feel less like space and more like exclusion. I still made Christmas dinner every year, still set the table for 3, still wrapped gifts they might never pick up. I even baked Stephanie's favorite gluten-free cinnamon rolls just in case. I wanted to believe they might show up, surprise me, remember that I existed beyond the polite texts and transactional calls. But they didn't, and I never said anything, never asked why, never hinted that I missed them. I didn't want to be a burden, or worse, an embarrassment. So I told myself this was love, this quiet, patient waiting, this rearranging of my heart to fit into corners they'd left empty. And maybe it was. But this year, something shifted, something cracked, not because they said anything cruel, but because they said nothing at all. A single message, a cabin rental, a new tradition that didn't include me. And suddenly all those years of sacrifice, of stitching together joy from scraps, of lighting up holidays with borrowed warmth, they felt like whispers in a house no one visits anymore. I used to think I was the foundation. Now I realize I've been the attic, still here, still holding history, but sealed off from the rest of the house. I wasn't the one who left the room. I was just the one they stopped noticing was still in it. The first time I felt it, that faint, brittle crack in the surface, I was holding a tray of deviled eggs in Stephanie's kitchen, standing quietly by the fridge while she gave a tour to her friends. "This is the open concept space," she said, her voice light, perfect for hosting. And yes, the in-laws visit sometimes too. Her friends giggled politely. No one looked my way. I stood there, invisible but useful, like a coat rack. It was small, really, just a moment, but it stayed with me, like a pinprick behind the ribs, the kind of thing you can't quite name, but you feel it every time you breathe. Later that same afternoon, she called me Evie, not Mom, not Mrs. Hartley, just Evie, like I was a neighbor who watered her plants while she was out of town. I told myself it was generational. She's modern, casual, not trying to be rude. But when Lucas called me Mom an hour later and she corrected him, "You mean Evie?" something in me curled. I laughed, soft, the way you do when you're not sure if it's a joke or a test, but no one corrected it, and so it stuck. I became Evie, even to my grandson, eventually. Not Grandma, not Nana, just Evie, like a label, a placeholder, something polite but distant. The spaces between us widened so slowly. I didn't notice at first. I'd offer to help with birthday parties and be told they'd already hired someone. I'd send over meals and hear back weeks later, "Oh, sorry, we ended up ordering Thai." I'd make suggestions gently, carefully, always with a smile, only to be met with the kind of nod you give a child holding a crayon drawing you don't plan to hang. The one that hurt the most came the day of Henry's first birthday. I arrived early, as instructed, wearing the dress Lucas said made me look like Christmas morning, holding a gift I had saved for all month, a handmade quilt, every patch a piece of his baby clothes I'd kept from the first time I held him. Stephanie greeted me at the door with a quick air kiss and a clipboard. "You're amazing for coming early," she said. "Would you mind checking in with the caterer? And maybe wiping down the high chair?" I nodded. "Of course. That's what you say. That's what you do. It's not about you. It's about the baby." But later, when the photographer took the family shot, I was in the kitchen washing cake off a plastic spoon. I didn't know they'd taken it until I saw the framed photo on Instagram. Lucas, Stephanie, her parents, Henry on her lap, caption 4 generations of love. 4. And yet I wasn't one of them. I stared at that picture for a long time. Not angry, not even sad, just disoriented, like realizing you've been left behind mid-sentence. I didn't say anything, didn't bring it up, didn't ask for a redo. I just commented, "What a beautiful memory," and pressed the little heart button with my thumb shaking. A few weeks later, I offered to host Thanksgiving. I'd done it for years. Lucas said he'd check. Stephanie said they'd already committed to her family's harvest weekend, complete with a themed tablescape and matching aprons. "It's just easier if we go there," she added. "They understand our rhythm better." I wasn't sure what that meant. Our rhythm, as if love had a tempo I couldn't keep. I sent a pie anyway. It came back untouched. "Too sweet," she said kindly. "We're doing low sugar now." Every time I adjusted, they changed the rules. Every time I stepped back, they moved further away. I started to feel like I was orbiting their lives. Close enough to feel their warmth. Never allowed to land. Lucas still called sometimes. Still said things like, "We miss you," or "Henry asks about you." But there was a rehearsed quality to it. Like he was reading a script, not reaching out. Once, he said, "You know, Steph really appreciates how chill you are." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I wasn't chill, I'd be gone. I'd be labeled difficult, emotional, needy. Chill meant quiet. Chill meant invisible. Chill meant don't ask to be in the photo. Just take it. And so I did. For years. Until chill started to feel more like frostbite. The kind that settles in your chest and makes even the warmest room feel lonely. And still, I said nothing. Because love, I thought, was silent, was sacrificial, was not making it about you. But maybe that wasn't love. Maybe that was just fear in better clothes. I wasn't pushed out of the picture. I was just never asked to step in. I had already bought the turkey when the message came through. 20 pounds, fresh, not frozen, seasoned with rosemary and orange peel, just the way Lucas liked when he was a boy. The cranberry sauce was chilling, handmade from scratch. None of that canned mess Stephanie always wrinkled her nose at. I had sewn a new table runner, deep green with embroidered snowflakes in silver thread, and cut little name tags for each place setting, even one for Henry with a tiny reindeer sticker. The house smelled like cinnamon, clove, and hope. I had just finished tying the last ribbon around a stack of presents when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. Not even a voice message, just a text. "Hey, Mom. Steph thought maybe this year we'd do something quieter, just the 3 of us. We found this cabin up north. Fireplace. Snow. No pressure. Hope you understand." That was it. No question. No offer to split the holiday. No follow-up. Just the cabin. I stood in the kitchen, holding the phone in one hand and a cinnamon stick in the other, wondering how a message could feel like a slap. I read it again, slower, trying to see if there was a line I had missed. Maybe it said, "We'll stop by afterward." Maybe it said, "We'll miss you." Maybe. But no, it said, "Hope you understand." A statement, not an invitation. I didn't answer right away. I just stared out the window where snow was beginning to dust the garden beds I'd covered last month with mulch. The same beds where Lucas used to bury plastic dinosaurs and dig them back up like a one-boy archaeology team. I had pictured Henry doing the same this spring. I'd even bought a new set of sandbox tools. They were still in the hall closet, unopened. At first I told myself it wasn't personal. People do this. Young families want their own space. They start their own traditions. I tried to find grace in it. But then I saw Stephanie's post that night. A photo of the cabin glassy lake, snow-laced pines, a steaming mug beside a folded scarf. Caption, "No stress, just family." I stared at those words like they were written in a foreign tongue. Just family. And I wasn't in it. The comments flooded in. "You deserve this beautiful family. Perfect Christmas." And there I was, in my kitchen, stirring soup for 3, in a house lit for no one. I called Lucas the next day, not to argue, just to clarify, to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice too chipper, like someone who knows bad news tastes better if served with enthusiasm. "Hey, Mom. Everything good?" I asked about the trip. He said they'd been planning it for a while, that they needed a reset, that Henry had been overwhelmed last year, that this would be peaceful, and you'll be okay. "Right," he added. "You've got your traditions, your friends, the town party." I laughed softly. The town party, that stale potluck at the community center where people stood around awkwardly sipping lukewarm cider and pretending not to envy the couples slow dancing to old Elvis songs. "Sure," I said. "I'll be fine." He sounded relieved. "Great, Steph was worried you'd be upset. We just thought it'd be better this way. Better for who I wanted to ask. But I didn't. I just nodded at the phone, even though he couldn't see me. "Don't worry about me," I said. "You have a lovely time." After we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the place setting still laid out from the night before, the little reindeer sticker already peeling from the corner of Henry's card. It was like planning a play and finding out the cast had quit opening night. I looked around the house, every candle placed, every bow tied, every detail curated like I was still part of something, like I still mattered. I lit the fireplace anyway, poured myself a glass of wine, turned on the old Nat King Cole record and let it spin, the needle skipping slightly on O Holy Night like it always did. I watched the flames curl and dance and thought, maybe this is just what getting older feels like. Not tragedy, not betrayal, just subtraction. The quiet, slow erasing of your name from the spaces you used to fill. That night, I wrapped the quilt I'd made for Henry, months of work, every square stitched by hand with pieces from Lucas's childhood pajamas, and placed it gently back into the closet. No one would unwrap it this year. I placed the name tags back into their drawer, blew out the candles, turned off the tree. I didn't throw anything away. I just paused everything. Like maybe, if I stopped moving, the ache would stop, too. I wasn't told not to come. I was just given no reason to stay. Christmas morning didn't come with carols this year. No familiar rustling of gift wrap, no giggles from the staircase, no clatter of a kettle left too long on the stove. It arrived instead like a letter never opened, a holiday half erased. I woke at the usual hour, as if muscle memory still believed there was someone to wake up for. The snow had fallen quietly through the night, no wind, no drama, just a hush that blanketed the world outside and made everything inside feel even more hollow. I moved through the house as I always had out of habit, not hope. I brewed the coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, the one Lucas painted for me in 3rd grade. The colors were faded now, chipped at the rim, but the word Mom still shimmered under the glaze. I touched the handle with both hands before lifting it, holding it like something sacred. I turned on the Christmas lights anyway. The tree still stood proud in the corner, ornaments arranged with care, tinsel draped like memory. I had wrapped every present under that tree with slow intention, imagining the sounds of surprise and laughter that would never come. The turkey had been roasting since dawn, more out of ritual than appetite. The smell filled the air, rosemary, garlic, a hint of citrus, and reminded me of all the dinners past when I carved with purpose, served with joy. I basted it again, even though there was no one to notice. I set the table for 3. I placed the embroidered napkins, the polished forks, the name tags I'd made by hand. Lucas, Stephanie, Henry. I hesitated before placing the third mine. I folded it quietly, like folding away a page I no longer belonged to. At noon, I plated the food. Just a small portion, one slice of turkey, a spoon of potatoes, cranberry sauce in a porcelain dish shaped like a leaf. I poured a glass of wine and sat down at the head of the table, because there was no one left to fill it. I stared at the empty chairs, the flickering candles, the tree blinking softly in the distance. The food sat steaming in front of me, untouched. I lifted the fork, put it down, lifted it again, took a bite. It tasted of salt and thyme. I chewed slowly, deliberately, as if trying to convince my body that this was still Christmas. I took a sip of wine, swallowed the silence. The house around me breathed memories. Robert's deep voice reading The Night Before Christmas. Lucas's squeals as he unwrapped a toy train. Stephanie's polite laughter the first year she came, when I overcooked the pie. All of it flickered through my mind like home movies in an empty theater. I reached beside me and picked up the quilt I had meant to gift Henry, a patchwork of flannel and corduroy, each square cut from Lucas's old baby clothes. I had stitched it every evening by the fire, hands steady, heart hopeful. I'd imagined Henry's small fingers running along the seams, pointing at the rocket ships and tiny animals, asking questions, but it remained folded in my lap, undelivered, unwanted. I ran my fingers over the fabric, tracing the past. I whispered stories to the air, stories I had planned to tell him as he opened it, but the room stayed silent. I finished my meal in 10 slow bites, washed the dishes one by one, drying each with the towel my mother had given me the Christmas before she passed. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink, packed the leftovers into neat containers. The fridge was full, but nothing inside felt nourishing. I turned off the tree lights, blew out the candles, took down the place cards and tucked them into the drawer without looking. I left the quilt where it was. Maybe tomorrow, I thought. I'll refold it. Maybe never. I sat in the armchair and let the afternoon stretch into dusk. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me that felt like tears. Only a stillness, not peaceful, not angry, just the kind that settles when you realize no one's coming, not because they forgot, but because they never planned to. I stared at the door. It didn't knock. I stared at the phone. It didn't ring. I stared at the life I built with bare hands, years and yeses, and wondered when I had stopped being part of it. There's no moment. You know, when people stop choosing you, it's not a slam or a scream. It's a slow fade, an unsent invitation, a seat left empty, and in the end, a full table with no one to feed. I didn't set the table for nothing. I just didn't know they'd already chosen a different one. I found it by accident, tucked between 2 faded dish towels I hadn't used in years. I was rearranging the linen drawer, not because it needed it, but because I needed something, anything, to occupy the long, quiet stretch between morning and evening. The towel was small, square, edges frayed with time, and right there in the corner, stitched in uneven red thread, was my name, Mom. The letters leaned to one side, the M slightly taller than the rest, the O shaped like a soft oval, the second M barely clinging to the line. Beneath it, a heart crooked, full. I sat down right there on the floor, tile cold beneath my knees, and ran my fingers over the thread. I remembered the afternoon it had appeared. Lucas was 10. He had just learned to sew in school and came home beaming, holding this little folded cloth like it was gold. "Don't look yet," he said, hiding it behind his back. "Close your eyes." And when I opened them, he dropped it in my lap with the pride only children can carry in their chest. "I made this for you, for Christmas. It's not perfect, but it's all by hand." I had cried then, one of the only times I let the tears fall in front of him. I kissed his forehead and told him it was perfect, that it was magic, that I would keep it forever. And I did. For years it lived in the kitchen drawer, folded on top, used only for the special things, wrapping cookies still warm, drying teacups on rainy days, or wiping my hands before I plated his birthday cake. It became part of our ritual, that towel, not because it was beautiful, but because he made it, because when he gave it to me, I could feel how much he saw me, that little boy, with his hands too big for his age and his heart too open for this world, saw me, and now, I wasn't sure he did anymore. I held the towel to my chest and closed my eyes. The house disappeared. The silence disappeared. The distance, the cold, the empty place cards gone. All I could see was that small boy leaning over the kitchen table, tongue between his teeth, threading a needle with more care than most adults give their whole lives. I whispered his name, not the name he wears now as a man with a business card and an address I'm not allowed to visit without calling first, but the name I called when he scraped his knee or had a nightmare. My Lucas. I held the towel tighter. It was soft now, fragile, a little stained, but the thread was still red, still holding. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I opened my eyes, the afternoon had passed into early dusk, the kind of blue hour where everything looks quieter than it really is. I folded the towel carefully, delicately, as though the thread might loosen if I moved too fast. I placed it back in the drawer, top layer, easy to reach. And I thought, maybe I haven't disappeared. Maybe I've just been misplaced. Not forgotten, just folded wrong. And something about that thought held me. I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. I was remembering that once I was everything. The next morning, I made a decision without telling anyone. I put on my coat, wrapped my scarf twice around my neck, not for the cold, but for comfort, and walked to the credit union 2 blocks from my house. I had been going there for 30 years. I knew the scent of the wooden counter polish, the faded carpet, the same artificial fern in the corner. But today, everything looked sharper, more real, like the edges had come into focus. "How can we help you today, Mrs.?" Hartley, the teller, asked with a smile. I placed my hands flat on the counter. "I'd like to cancel an automatic transfer." Her fingers froze above the keyboard. "Monthly mortgage support to Lucas Hartley." I said it clearly, without apology, without wobble. She blinked. "Of course. Let me just bring up the file." I waited while she clicked and typed. My eyes traced the bulletin board behind her, a flyer about a winter coat drive, a photo of a golden retriever up for adoption, a quote printed in bold, "You can't pour from an empty cup." I breathed in, slow and deep. "You've been sending $1,200 a month?" she confirmed, not judgmental, just factual. "Would you like to stop immediately, or after the next cycle immediately?" I said. "Today." She nodded. "It's done." I felt nothing at first. No rush of pride, no guilt, just space. The kind you don't know you've needed until it appears. I walked home slowly, hands buried in my pockets, snow crunching beneath my boots. There was no one to tell, no one to explain to, but I knew something had shifted. That night, I took out my old lockbox, the one that held my marriage license, Robert's obituary, Lucas's birth certificate. At the bottom was my original will, typed and printed in 2007. Lucas was the sole beneficiary. It had never occurred to me to change that. Even after the distance, even after the quiet exclusions and the birthday calls that never came. But now, I unfolded a blank page, picked up my pen, and I wrote a new beginning. I left the house to the Willowbrook Public Library specifically to fund a reading room for mothers and children. I donated the savings account to a scholarship for students pursuing public education. I kept one small account, just enough to carry me through my own days, and perhaps a few indulgences I'd spent years denying myself. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I had spent too many years giving everything away without asking what I was keeping for me. I signed my name with steady hands, dated it, folded it twice, placed it gently into the envelope marked to be opened only if. The next morning, I brought it to a notary. "Big change?" he asked. I smiled. "Long overdue?" I walked out into the sunlight, blinking. The world hadn't changed, but I had, and that was enough for now. I didn't cut him off. I just stopped paying to be forgotten. It was a Wednesday gray, brittle, forgettable until it wasn't. I was on my way to return a book that had sat unopened beside my bed for weeks when I stepped into the Willow and Page bookstore and saw Clara Evans standing by the poetry shelf, thumbing through a Mary Oliver collection like she was searching for something she hadn't yet named. She hadn't changed much, still wearing that same long wool coat with mismatched buttons, her gray hair twisted into a bun that leaned slightly left. I almost didn't say anything. After all these years, what was there to say? But then she turned, and our eyes met, and before I could second-guess the warmth that came rushing in, I heard myself whisper, "Clara." She looked up and smiled softly at first, then with the kind of joy that belongs only to people who remember you from before life got so quiet. "Evie Hartley," she said, laughing. "You look exactly the same." We hugged, briefly, gently, as if not to break the moment or each other. We found a spot by the window, 2 armchairs nestled beneath a lamp that flickered like it had a pulse of its own. We talked about everything that didn't matter, weather, hips that ached in the cold, book prices, and then, without warning, she leaned in and said, "I saw Lucas." My breath caught. I didn't ask where or when, I just nodded, bracing. "He came by the office. Needed help setting up a trust for Henry," she said. "He looked good. Tired. But grounded." I smiled politely, unsure if I wanted to know more. But Clara didn't stop. "He talked about you." That sentence alone felt like a gift I didn't know how much I needed. "He said you were the one person in his life who never asked for anything. And because of that, he forgot you had needs at all." I stared at her, heart held still in my chest. "He said," Clara continued, voice softer now, "that your strength made him blind, that your silence made him assume you were fine, that he always knew you were the reason he made it, but that he never said it, because he thought you already knew." My hands trembled slightly against the sides of my paper cup. She reached over, rested hers on mine. "Evie." He didn't speak with pride. He spoke like someone waking up too late. I didn't answer. I just sat there, blinking at the words, letting them settle like dust after a long fall. "He said Stephanie doesn't understand what you mean to him," Clara added, more carefully now. "And maybe he doesn't either. But he's starting to. You should know that." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to wrap her words around me like a quilt and feel warm again. But part of me wounded. Wiser remained still. "It doesn't change what's happened," I finally said. "No," she nodded. "But it means it wasn't nothing." We sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the snow had begun again, light, aimless, like even it didn't know where it wanted to land. "He asked about the quilt," she said suddenly. I turned. He remembered. Clara smiled. "He said you used to tell him every thread held a story. He wondered if Henry would get to hear them too someday." My throat burned. All this time, I thought I'd become invisible. But maybe I had just become quiet. And maybe quiet doesn't mean forgotten. When we stood to leave, she hugged me tighter. "You gave him the map," she whispered. "It's not your fault he didn't follow it the right way." I walked home slower than usual, every step a memory, every corner a breath I hadn't let myself take in years. That night, I didn't call Lucas. I didn't write. I didn't dig up old photos to remind him of who I was. I just sat on the couch, pulled the quilt over my knees, and let myself feel seen, not because he said it to me, but because someone else did. Because someone who didn't have to carry my story chose to remember it. And maybe that was enough to begin again, not with him, but with myself. For the first time, I saw my giving not as something weak or invisible, but as something so quietly powerful it had held up an entire world without asking for applause. I whispered, not to anyone in particular, just to the quiet. I was never missing. I was just unnamed. He didn't erase me. He just never realized I was the page everything had been written on. The sun came out the next morning, not with fanfare, but with the kind of quiet clarity that sneaks through blinds and warms the kitchen tiles before your feet even get there. I stood in front of the window, hands wrapped around a fresh mug of coffee, watching the light slide across the countertop like it belonged there. Something in the air felt different, not lighter, not louder, just steadier, like the world had stopped asking me to explain myself. I moved through the house slowly, not because I was tired, but because I finally wasn't rushing to make it feel full. The silence that used to echo like abandonment now hummed like solitude. I opened the closet and pulled out a sweater I hadn't worn in years, deep plum, soft at the collar, frayed slightly at the cuffs. Lucas once told me I looked like a cranberry dream in it, and I had laughed, thinking how sweet boys could be before they learned the language of indifference. I wore it anyway. Not for nostalgia, but because it felt like mine. I took the quilt from the sofa and spread it across the guest bed, letting it rest like a visitor finally welcomed. I opened the windows just enough to let the air move through the rooms, not to cleanse anything, but to remind the walls they were still breathing. I didn't play music. I didn't need to fill the house with noise. I baked a small tray of apple scones and sat down with one, split it with my hands. No fork, no fuss. I let the crumbs fall where they may. There was no one to impress, no performance to keep, just me, and the heat of something real. I walked into the living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. I didn't rearrange them, didn't pull any down, but I did add an old picture of me in the garden, taken years ago when I wasn't posing, just laughing at something Robert had said. I was holding a basket of tomatoes and wearing gloves 2 sizes too big. My hair was pinned back. My cheeks were flushed. I looked alive. I placed it in the center, not to be vain, but to remind myself that I had been here too, that this house didn't just belong to memories of others, it belonged to me. I made a list that afternoon, not of groceries or bills, but of things I'd stopped doing without noticing. Singing in the car, walking without my phone, reading poetry out loud, sitting by the lake for no reason. I didn't cry while writing it. I smiled, because I knew what I was going to do next. The cottage on Birch Hill had a sign out front: Community Art Circle Thursdays at 5. I had passed it a dozen times, always meaning to stop, always deciding I'd go when I had more time, more energy, more something. But now, I had time. I had space. I had no more excuses. That Thursday, I walked into the circle with nothing but a notebook and a pencil. No expectations. No one waiting for me to get dinner on the table. I sat between a retired firefighter and a teenager who painted her fingernails black. We shared tea. We drew shapes that made no sense. We talked about why some colors feel like forgiveness and why silence can be its own kind of music. No one asked me who I was to them. No one needed me to play the role of mother or martyr. I was just Evie. Not Evie the disappointment, not Evie the afterthought, just Evie. On my way home, I walked slower than usual, not from sadness, from fullness, the kind that takes its time. The snow had started again, soft and harmless. I tilted my face to the sky, let a flake land on my lip, and smiled like it was mine. Back at home, I lit one candle not for tradition, but for warmth. I poured myself a glass of water and whispered, "You made it." Not because I'd conquered anything, but because I had survived my own erasure and rewritten myself back in. I sat by the fire and opened a blank page. I didn't write a letter to Lucas. I didn't write a speech. I just wrote a line that came from somewhere deep and quiet and new. You are allowed to be loved and still leave. And beneath it, I added, you are allowed to be alone and still be whole. I folded the paper, placed it inside the towel drawer, right beneath the stitched red mom, a place I could find it, a place that already knew me. That night, I didn't fall asleep to the weight of absence. I fell asleep to the sound of snow and the comfort of choosing myself not instead of anyone, but finally, for once, I didn't stop loving them. I just started loving me too. The phone rang on a Sunday afternoon, just as I was taking my coat off after a long walk by the lake. The kind of walk where your breath fogs in front of you and your fingers curl into your sleeves, not out of cold, but out of memory. I didn't rush to answer. I looked at the name on the screen, Lucas, and let it ring twice before I picked up. Mom. His voice cracked like dry wood. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't performance. It was unsure. I said his name back like I was remembering it for the first time in years. He hesitated, then launched into something between an apology and a confession, words tumbling over each other, as if saying them faster would make them hurt less. He said he missed me, that Henry had asked why there weren't pictures of me in their home, that Stephanie had told him I'd always been distant, and for the first time, he realized she didn't know the difference between silence and absence. He said he looked at old photos last night, ones where I was young, smiling, tired, but always behind the camera, and it hit him that he had grown up with everything because I had given up everything without ever asking to be seen. He said he was sorry not just for missing Christmas, or the text, or the years, but for not realizing that I was the story, not the footnote. I listened without interrupting, stirring my tea with the edge of a spoon, watching the steam dance like it had all the time in the world. When he finally stopped, I said nothing for a while. And then I said, Lucas, I don't want another chapter that begins with guilt. If we are to have anything at all, it has to begin with truth. He said, I want that. I said, then tell me this. Do you see me now? His voice broke on the word. Yes, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I finally didn't feel erased. I said, good. Now take your time. I won't chase you anymore, but I also won't wait. I could hear the relief in his breath, but also the weight of what that meant. I hung up before the moment stretched too far. I sat there for a long while, the phone quiet in my lap, the house silent but not lonely. Later that evening, I took out a small suitcase, not because I was going anywhere yet, but because I could. I laid out a few dresses I hadn't worn in years, a pair of boots, a scarf Robert had once bought me in Vermont that still smelled faintly of pine. I printed a list of small towns I had once wanted to visit, places with names like Echo Valley and Silver Pines, and folded it into my coat pocket. I wrote a note and pinned it on the fridge. Gone for a while. Be back when it feels right. The next morning, I walked down to the bakery and bought 2 croissants. One for now, one for later. I sat on a park bench, surrounded by mothers chasing toddlers and old men reading papers and teenagers with headphones turned up too loud. No one knew who I was. No one needed me to fix anything. I was just a woman eating warm pastry on a cold bench under a winter sun that finally didn't feel like it was avoiding me. I watched a dog chase a red ball until its tongue lolled out sideways. I watched 2 girls braid each other's hair in mismatched gloves. I smiled without effort. When I returned home, I didn't look at the phone. I didn't check for updates. I placed the extra croissant on a plate, left it by the window, and sat down to write. Not a journal, not a list. A letter to myself, one that began not with Dear Evie, but with, I'm proud of you. I wrote about the woman who raised a son on one salary and one spine, about the nights she went without so someone else wouldn't have to, about how her love was so quiet. It sometimes got mistaken for furniture. I ended it with, "You mattered." Even when no one clapped, I folded the paper, slid it into the quilt pocket, and felt it soften the weight of years. That night, I cooked dinner for one without apology. I used the good plates. I poured wine. I lit a candle. I played music I didn't have to explain to anyone. And when I lay in bed, I didn't wait for dreams to rescue me. I entered them like someone who finally belonged in her own story. The next morning, I opened the windows wide and breathed in the cold like it was a friend. I whispered, "We begin again," and meant it. Not because I had fixed everything, not because they had come running back, but because I had chosen finally, fully to stay with myself. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was just learning to be home within myself. To the women who once lit every room, only to be left in the dark. If you've ever poured love so quietly they forgot it had a name, this story was yours too. You are not invisible. You were never just background. Take one small step for yourself today, without apology, because sometimes coming home means coming back to you.